I hope all of you are doing good, and today I am here with a video on microorganisms, friend or foe. Class 8 science, and in this video we are going to learn in detail about the different types of microorganisms. Yes, and that's going to be quite interesting. I am Roshni from LearnoHub, the free learning platform which I have been building for the last 9 years, and I'm still counting and I'm trying to make it bigger and better. So visit learnohub.com if you want to learn math, science, English grammar, tips and tricks and all of that absolutely for free. So whenever we think of microorganisms, now instead of using the term microorganism, if I use the term germs, I think you will relate to it even better. You would have seen so many advertisements coming on the television saying that you should wash your hands with this soap or with this hand cleaner soap to protect yourself against germs. So what exactly are these germs? All we are told is that if we do not maintain hygiene and cleanliness, it will give rise to germs. And what are germs? Germs can attack us and they can cause diseases. So these germs are nothing but the microorganisms, and these microorganisms are capable of causing a disease. So whenever we think of these kind of microorganisms, they have that appearance of a devil for us. So we feel that, oh my god, microorganisms are really scary, isn't it? So why do we have that scare for them? Because we always have it in our mind that microorganisms means that they will attack us and they will cause some disease in us. They will make us fall ill. But now the question is, are microorganisms always harmful? So is that the only purpose that they solve? They want to harm us in some way or the other? Well, not really. So microorganisms can also be friendly. So there are two categories of microorganisms. So one is the good microorganisms or the friendly microorganisms, and the other category is the harmful microorganisms. So these harmful organisms are the ones which are to be scared of. So they can cause diseases, they can make us ill, but the friendly microorganisms, they are not going to harm us. Instead, they are going to help us. We will see in this lesson that what are those friendly microorganisms which help us and what are those harmful organisms which harm us. So we will talk about both the good as well as the bad sides of the microorganisms. Now, before we talk about all that, I think it is important to understand what exactly are microorganisms, which kind of organisms fall under the category of microorganisms. Now, microbes and microorganisms, these two terms are used interchangeably. So, microbes are also known as microorganisms. So, please do not get confused with the terms. So, now the basic question, what are microbes? So these are extremely small organisms that cannot be seen with naked eyes. Now something which is extremely small, for that purpose we use the term micro. Micro means very small. So these are very small organisms. So how can we see them? We cannot see them with our naked eye, but we can see them with the help of a magnifying glass or a microscope. So magnifying glass helps us to see those microorganisms which are at least comparatively little bigger. But if the organism is extremely small, then you cannot see it even with a magnifying glass. In that case, you would need a microscope of higher resolution. So without a magnifying glass or without a microscope, you cannot see it at all. They are also called as microorganisms. Now, example of microorganisms are bacteria, fungi, viruses. These are all examples of microorganisms. Now, you would have heard people saying that, okay, I fell ill because I had a viral fever. Have you ever heard people talking like that? Or somebody says that, you know what, I got a bacterial infection in my throat. So what are these viral fever, bacterial infection, fungal diseases? So these are basically the problems or the diseases which are caused by any of these organisms. But that doesn't mean that bacteria, fungi or viruses are only meant to cause diseases. So that is not the case. So here in this lesson, we will talk about how these organisms can be helpful and how these organisms can be harmful. Now, one important thing which I would like to mention here is whenever I talk about a virus, you have to consider a star mark on viruses. That's because viruses are quite different from other microorganisms, and that is why viruses are often not categorized as a microorganism. Now, why I have included it in the example is viruses are also extremely small, so they also cannot be seen with naked eyes. So as per that definition, viruses have been included in the example, but when you talk about the classification of microorganisms, viruses are not included because viruses do not show the basic characteristics of a living organism. So please do remember that viruses are an exception. They do not behave like a living organism as long as they are outside a host body. Now, as soon as it enters inside the body of another organism, for example, the virus enters inside a bacteria, then it starts behaving like a living organism. So because of this peculiar property of viruses, they are often not included as a classification of microorganism. Okay, so now let us look at the various groups into which microorganisms can be classified. So they can be broadly classified into 4 groups: bacteria, fungi, protozoa and algae. So these are the 4 main groups into which microorganisms can be classified. Now, as I mentioned before, that we will talk about each of them in little more detail. So let us talk about bacteria first. So bacteria are the oldest life forms. Now, it is told that, nobody knows exactly which was the first life form that existed on earth, because when you will go to your higher classes, you will get to learn that the variety of life forms which we see today, for example, the plants, animals, insects, birds, human beings, so many different types of life forms. But if you go back in time, you will see that all these life forms, they all originated or they all evolved from the same life form. So all of them share a common ancestor, but with over long period of time, each different life form, they underwent a lot of changes, and that's how their appearance and their behavior changed so much. Now, bacteria, they are considered to be the one of the first life forms that existed on earth. So that means you can say that they are our ancestors. They are unicellular, that is, they are made up of one cell. Now, you might be wondering, what do we mean by a cell? Now, I will give you an example to explain what is a cell. For example, when you want to build a house, what do you need? You need bricks. Lot of bricks together can help you to construct a house of your own choice. Now, if you want to design a house of, if you want to design a 2-story building, you can design that. But for that also you need bricks. If you want to design a small house, just a single floor, for that also you need bricks. If you want to design a huge tower, for that also you need bricks. So bricks are the building blocks for your construction. So a number of bricks together, they form a huge building of your own choice, of your own design. In a very similar way, inside every living organism, there are some basic building blocks, and these basic building blocks are called cell. So each building block is a cell. Like here you have a brick. So in a very similar way, in a living organism, you have a cell. Now, there are 2 types based on the number of cells which are present in an organism. There can be 2 types of organism. One is unicellular. Uni means one. So that means unicellular. That is cell. So organism which is made up of just one cell. That means just one brick is forming the entire building. So only one brick is present in the construction. So similarly, if there is a living organism which is made up of only one cell, that is called unicellular. So bacteria are unicellular, but if you take example of human beings, we are all multicellular. Our body is made up of multiple cells. So bacteria were unicellular. They appear in a variety of shapes and sizes. So if you look at the shapes of bacteria, some of them are spherical, some of them are cylindrical, as you can see here, some of them were elongated. So a variety of shapes are available in case of bacteria. So they come in a huge variety of shapes and sizes. So looking at their shape or looking at their size, you cannot tell that if that organism is a bacteria. Now, where do they live? They live in soil, water, radioactive waste, deep portions of the earth crust. So basically, if you talk about bacteria, they are present almost everywhere, in air, in water, in soil, in the wastes, even inside the earth crust. So bacteria are one of those organisms which can survive even under extreme conditions. So some of the bacteria can survive even in extremely high temperatures. Some of them can survive even at extremely low temperatures. So bacteria can live almost anywhere and everywhere. They can even live inside plant or animal bodies. That means they are living inside another animal body. For example, you take our own examples. You take example of human beings. Even inside the body of human beings, there are many bacteria which lives there. So bacteria, some of them might harm our body, some of them might help our body. So, but they derive their nutrition from our body itself. So basically our body is their house. So bacteria can live inside plant or animal bodies also. They live in colonies. That is, one bacteria doesn't exist in isolation. A lot of bacteria together they live. Like how you have your residential colonies where multiple houses are present within the same compound. So you live in groups. So in a similar way, bacteria also, they live in colonies. That is, a lot of bacteria, they live together. Talking about their food habits, so how do they get their foods? From where do they get their food? Some of them are autotrophic while others are heterotrophic. What is the meaning of autotrophic? Auto means own or self. So they can prepare their own food. So some of the bacteria will prepare their own food. Now can you give me an example of a living organism which can prepare their own food? Yes, the green plants. How do they prepare their own food? By the process of photosynthesis. So in presence of solar energy utilizing carbon dioxide and water, green plants can prepare their own food in the form of sugar. So green plants are called as autotrophic. So one example of autotrophic organisms are green plants. Whereas hetero means others. The term hetero means others. So heterotrophic organisms, they depend on others for their food. Now, one example of heterotrophic organism would be an animal. For example, a goat or a cow. They depend on plants for their food, and plants are other living organisms. Similarly, human beings, they either depend on other animals for their food or they depend on other plants. So that they also depend on other organisms for their food. So they are also heterotrophic. So bacteria, some of the bacteria can prepare their own food, whereas some others depend on others for their food. So some are autotrophic while some others are heterotrophic. So here if you look at this picture, this actually shows you how exactly bacteria look like when seen under a high power microscope. So under this you can actually see some rod shaped structures are present there, cylindrical structures. So these are the bacteria, but when you see it with your naked eye, you will not be able to see it at all. So this was the first classification of microbes. So as I said, autotrophic means prepare their own food and heterotrophic means depend on others for their food. The next classification is fungi. So what are fungi? Have you ever observed that if you keep a piece of bread, you do not keep it inside the refrigerator. Just take a piece of bread and keep it outside at normal room temperature for a couple of days. I mean, not just for 1 or 2 days, but for a couple of days, maybe some 6-7 days. What happens over a period of time? As time passes, you will see that the bread gets spoiled. That's what we call it, and we just throw it into the dustbin. Now, have you ever observed how a spoiled bread looks like? So this is how it looks like. You will see the appearance of some white or grayish natted appearance on the bread, and this indicates that the bread is spoiled. Now the first question is, what is this structure which is formed on the surface of the bread and how is it formed? So this is nothing but fungi. Now what happens is, when you leave it just at the room temperature, over a period of time, these microorganisms called fungi develop on the bread, and these fungi are responsible for spoiling the bread. So let us see what are these. But on the same scenario, instead of keeping the bread outside, if you keep it inside the refrigerator, what happens? It stays good. It doesn't get spoiled. Why is that? That's because when you keep it inside the refrigerator, you are actually keeping it at a very low temperature. Now at that low temperature, fungi is not able to grow, because fungi, they are also living organisms and they also need appropriate climate and appropriate temperature to grow. So inside the refrigerator, the temperature is very low, therefore it is not appropriate for growth of fungi, and that is why the bread is not spoiled. So these fungi are multicellular organisms, that is, multi means multiple. So this is made up of multiple cells, so not one cells but a group of cells together form the fungi. They are heterotrophic, that is, they depend on others for their food. They cannot prepare their own food. Now what kind of food do they actually eat upon, or what is their fooding habit actually? Now they can feed on dead and decaying matter. So one type of food for them is dead and decaying matter. So what is this dead and decaying matter? Now plant remains or animal remains after they die. So basically the fungi is dependent on other organisms like plants and animals, so that when they die, it can feed upon their dead and decaying matter. So that is one source of food for them. Next is, they can exist with other organisms and therefore get food from them. So association with other organisms, like as I mentioned before also, maybe that fungi lives within a mutual association with another organism, where fungi also helps that organism in some way, and that organism provides food to the fungi. So that is another way of getting food from other organisms. And the third scenario is, it can also be parasitic. That means it lives inside the body of another animal and gets its food from that animal, and at the same time it is parasitic. That means it will cause disease to that animal. So fungi can also be parasitic in nature. So these are some of the ways by which fungi obtain their food. They prefer warm and moist places to grow, and that is why the bread which was left outside, it tends to catch fungi, because fungi gets a suitable environment. It gets a warm place as well as moist place, because when you keep the bread open, there is a lot of moisture present in the surroundings or present in the atmosphere. So there, due to the presence of that moisture plus the temperature is quite warm, and both the things taken together help in the growth of fungi. But the same bread, when you keep it inside the refrigerator, the temperature is very low. So warm place is not available. Secondly, moisture also is not there to support the growth of fungi. Live in colonies. So fungi also, they do not live in isolation. They also live in groups. Immobile. They do not move from one place to another. So they do not have any locomotory organ as such. So they just remain at one place. So let us look at some of the examples of fungi. So yeast is a very common example of fungi. Mushroom is another example, and molds are another example of fungi. So these are the three most common examples of fungi. Now let me tell you where you would have encountered each of these. Now if you talk about molds, you would have seen it the way you are seeing it on the screen. Like if you keep an orange or any other fruit, just do not refrigerate it, keep it at room temperature for quite a few days. What happens? You see a white layer which is being formed on the surface of the fruit. So this layer which is formed is due to the growth of fungi, and these fungi specifically are molds. Mushroom are the ones which you often eat as well. So this is edible. So you would have often eaten dishes prepared out of mushroom. So mushrooms are also nothing but fungi. Yeast They are often used in the baking industry, like if you want to prepare bread or if you want to prepare certain types of cakes. So in that you need yeast. You would have, if you go to a departmental store, you will often see that yeast powder is available in packets. So this yeast powder, it is also prepared from yeast. So these are some of the examples of fungi, and we will see how they are helpful to us and again how they are harmful to us. So this was the second class. Now the third classification is protozoa. What are protozoa? These are those organisms which are mostly unicellular. So we cannot say that all of them are unicellular, but yes, most of them are. However, some of them might be multicellular as well. So unicellular, that is made up of one cell. So that one cell will perform all the functions in that organism. Some of them are autotrophic while others are heterotrophic. So I already mentioned what is autotrophic and what is heterotrophic. The word hetero means others and the word auto means self. So the autotrophic, they will prepare their own food. So they are self-dependent. Heterotrophic, they will depend on others for their food. Now some of them will be autotrophic while some will be heterotrophic. If you talk about where they live, they prefer moist and aquatic habitats. Now, you see one thing in common. Most of these microorganisms, they prefer warm places, they prefer moist places. That is why you also see that most of the things which spoil, that spoils due to presence of moisture or due to presence of warm temperature. And that is why all of us have something called as refrigerator in our house. Because inside the refrigerator, the temperature is quite low. So it becomes a little difficult for these kind of microorganisms to grow. And also, if you prepare a dish which does not contain water, it will last for a longer time when compared to a dish which has water. That's because one of them has moisture which can favor the growth of microorganisms. The other one doesn't have moisture, so it inhibit the growth of microorganism. So presence of moisture and a warm temperature, they often favor the growth of microbes. Protozoa, however, can live singly. So this is different from bacteria and fungi. So bacteria and fungi, they live in colonies. That is, a lot of them live together. But here they live as single. So they do not really need a group of organisms to be there. They can exist on themselves. Some of the examples of protozoa are amoeba. Amoeba is again unicellular. So here in the picture you can see this is how an amoeba looks like. So this is just one cell. So this cell will do all the required processes like ingestion of food, egestion of food. So everything will be done by this one cell. Next is paramecium. So you see this is how paramecium looks. Again, paramecium has the cilia outside their body. So these hair-like structures which you see outside, they are called cilia and they help the protozoa or the paramecium to move from one place to another. So like we saw that fungi, they were immobile, but protozoa, they are all mobile. So they have organs which help them in locomotion. For example, in case of paramecium, they have cilia. If you talk about amoeba, they have pseudopodia, which is also known as false feet. So with that, they actually can locomote or they can move from one place to another. Trypanosoma, this is another example of a protozoa. So here you can see this is these organisms which you see here, they have a flagella at the end. So this flagella will help in their locomotion. So protozoa, they are all mobile and they have specific locomotory organ as well. And now the fourth classification, that is algae. What is algae? Now have you ever observed, if you go to a pond, not all the ponds, but if you have ever come across a pond or a lake where the surface of the water is not the color of water. Instead, you have a green layer on the surface of the water. It is as if a green carpet has been put on the surface of water. So what is that green carpet? What is that green layer made up of? The green layer is actually made up of algae. So it is nothing but growth of algae on the surface of water. That forms the green layer. So these algae, they are multicellular. You do not have any algae which is made up of one cell. All of them are made up of multiple cells. They prefer mostly aquatic habitats, and that is why you will generally see algae wherever moisture is present or wherever water is present. In fact, you would have observed these type of growth of algae even in the walls of your building if it gets damped very easily. Like, not in all the buildings, of course. Now, if you go to some very old building or a very old house, you will often see that the floor or the wall, which remains moist most of the time, they show growth of some green, very small, tiny green layer of small plant-like structures. So they are algae. Some of the examples of algae are Spirogyra, Eulothrix, Chlamydomonas. So these are some of the examples of algae. Now, the names might be sounding really tough for you, but we are not going to get into the details of each of these types of algae. That is reserved for your higher classes. However, there are videos available. So if you want to have want to have a detailed understanding of each of these type of algae, you can refer the video lessons on biology for the higher classes. So with this, we have discussed regarding the four major classes of the microorganisms. Now let us talk about the diversity. Now, we spoke about all the different types of microbes. Now, did you notice the diversity? That is the variety of shapes and sizes in which they are available. So if you talk about bacteria or fungi or protozoa or algae, so all of them have got a variety of shapes. They can be spherical, they can be cylindrical, they can be round, they can be flat. So they can actually exist in a variety of shapes as well as sizes. All of them are very small, but even in that very small, so which organism is how many microns, so that also depends. So their size also comes in a huge variety. So if you talk about it, so the diversity is not only in terms of their shape and size, the diversity also exists in terms of their habitat. That is, in what type of location do we find the microorganisms. As we said, they can be found almost everywhere. You can find them in soil, you can find them in water, you can find them in air, you can also find them inside body of another organisms. So in this picture, what I am trying to show is, even inside the human intestine, you often see these microorganisms parting inside. So it's like they can exist in a variety of locations. So that means also the microbes are extremely diversified. That is, they have a huge variety of habitats where they can be found. They can also exist inside other plants, not only animals, but they also exist in plants. So now let us talk about the exception, that is the viruses. Because when we talk about microorganisms, we are basically talking about extremely small organisms, and the discussion would remain incomplete if we leave viruses. So let us talk about viruses and why are viruses an exception. So viruses are also microscopic, and that is why we are talking about them here. Otherwise, we would have not discussed viruses at all. However, they are not considered as microorganism. Why? Because microorganism refers to something which is microscopic, that is, which is extremely small. At the same time, that should be a living organism. But if you talk about the viruses, they do not behave like normal living organisms. So what are viruses? Do I mean to say that viruses are non-living things? They are like the chairs and tables around us? Not really again, because had that been the case, in that case, doesn't matter, even if it is very small, why would I include it, or why would I even like to discuss it under the lesson, under the topic of microbes? Now, there is a reason behind that. The contradiction with the viruses is that they do not behave like living organisms as long as they remain isolated, that is, as long as they are outside the host cell. Now, what is a host cell? Now, as I mentioned before also, that microbes can also exist inside body of other organisms. Now, the organism inside whose body the microbe stays, so that organism is called a host. So like it is something like, let us suppose if you are organizing a party on your birthday. So in that party, who is the host? You are the host and your friends are the guest, right? So that means all your guests are going to come to your place for the party. So in a very similar way, these viruses can exist inside the body of other organisms. So those organisms which welcome the viruses, they are the hosts. So these hosts can be any other organism. For example, the host can be a bacteria. So in that case, the virus can actually get inside the body of the bacteria. Now the contradiction is that these viruses behave like non-living when they are outside the host cell. So as long as it is not entering inside the host cell, as long as it is not entering inside the bacteria, it will behave like a non-living organism. In the sense, it does not eat, it does not sleep, it does not behave like plants, it does not behave like animals, it does not perform metabolic activities. So it doesn't show any sign of life as long as it is outside the host cell. But what happens as it enters the host cell? Now, as soon as the virus enters inside the host cell, it enters inside the bacteria, it starts to reproduce. So it reproduces only when it is inside the host cell. So as soon as it enters inside the host cell, it starts to multiply and replicate. Now, non-living organisms will not replicate, right? Your chairs and your tables, they do not multiply overnight. So in a very similar way, had viruses been completely non-living, in that case, doesn't matter, even if they have entered inside the host cell, they shouldn't start multiplying. So because of this peculiar behavior, viruses are considered as non-living when they are outside the host cell, but as soon as they enter inside the host cell, they are considered as living. So because of this confusion, they are not considered as a part of microorganism, but at the same time, we discuss them as an exception under the microorganisms. And in this lesson, we will also talk about the various diseases or the various usefulness which we get out of the viruses. So now the question is, how do microbes play a role in our life? Because in this lesson, we are trying to understand the good and bad of microbes. That is, what good role do they play in our life and what bad role do they play in our life. So till now, we got to know what exactly are microbes. What are the examples of microbes? So we are clear with all that. So now we have to understand how it helps us and how it harms us. Now, all of us know that microbes are harmful to us. So that is something which is known to all of us. Whenever we think of a microbe, whenever the word bacteria or a virus comes to your mind, all you could think is maybe a viral flu or a bacterial infection. So we can only relate these organisms mostly to their bad effects. In fact, if I ask you that what are how these microbes are harmful to us, you can name plenty of diseases, and then you can see that these diseases are caused by the microbes. So we can think of n number of situations or n number of diseases which are caused by different microorganisms. But in this lesson, our focus is not only to talk about the harmful microorganisms, but also to talk about the friendly microorganisms, because there are quite a few microorganisms which also help us in a number of ways, but their help is not that popular amongst us. So we are first going to talk about the friendly microbes, and then we will take up the harmful microbes. So microbes cause a large number of diseases in animals and plants. This is something which is known to all of us. In fact, if you look at human beings, it often happens that we eat something outside and something like food poisoning happens, and then we might have stomachache, or we might have vomiting, or we might have loose motion, and all these happens because of the presence of some harmful microbes in the food item which we ate. So now the question is that whatever we thought that microbes are only meant to harm us, that is not true, because they help us as well. So a microbe can be our friend, it can also be our foe. So it can be a friend, it can be an enemy. So in this lesson, we will talk about both these aspects of microbes. So first, let us concentrate on the good things, and then we will talk about the bad.
So what do you guys say? Was the video useful? So if you have a feedback to share with us, do let us know in the comment section. And I will see you all very soon with a new video, with a new topic. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.